Right, okay. All right, tonight I'm going to speak on the New Testament political background and especially on Herodians. Because when I've actually read the Bible at the various times, I've kind of looked through and it says Herod this, Herod that, and right at the birth of Jesus, and right later when Paul appears before a Herod, and it's hard to kind of work out which is which. So I actually decided to do some research and sort it out in my own mind, and I thought, oh, I think that's actually worth sharing. And also for this purpose, I've actually expanded it to try and give a bigger political picture of what was going on in the world at the time of the New Testament. So these are the key figures that I'm going to discuss, and some more as well. So there are the Herodians, and these are the key Herodians who are in power. Antipater, Herod the Great, Archelaus, Herod Antipas, Herod Agrippa I, and Herod Agrippa II. And these also interface with the emperors who were ruling the Roman Empire at the time. So they were Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. And you may have heard of some of these figures. So the Herodian dynasty started with a guy called Antipater the Idumean, and he does not appear in the Bible at all because he precedes the New Testament. He had a wife called Cypros, and he had 4 children: Phasael, Joseph, Salome was a woman, a daughter, and Herod the Great. And we'll consider Antipater the Idumean first. He lived between around about 100 BC and 43 BC, and there's a bust of him. It's a little bit degraded. He looks as though he's an evil person from the Thunderbirds, instead of, I'm sure he's a bit more handsome than that. But he was the son of Antipas, and that family line had converted to Judaism a number of years before. So he was the original founder of the Herodian Dynasty, and he was the father of Herod the Great. And he was from Idumea, which is on the eastern side of the Jordan, the other side of the Jordan. And the former name for Idumea was Edom. And so he was an Arab. So he's a wealthy person from that region, and he supported Pompey in conquering Palestine in 63 BC. So before the Herodian line, there was a dynasty, a Jewish dynasty that had control over Israel, and they were called the Hasmoneans, or they derived from the Maccabean rebellion. And at this time, there were 2 brothers who were actually vying for power, and they had a bit of a civil war. And so the Romans thought that they would come in and help them and heal the situation, and they did that by kicking them out and taking over. And so Antipater actually came along and helped Pompey with that process, and so he won their favour. He also became a friend of Mark Antony and Cleopatra, and he also helped to rescue Julius Caesar in the siege of Alexandria. So Alexandria is on the northern part of Africa, and Julius Caesar was in Alexandria at about this time. He was involved in wars, and he got into trouble, and Antipater helped to come and rescue him, so he earned Julius Caesar's favour as well. So they rewarded him. He was given Roman citizenship, which was something really big, and he was actually put in charge of basically he was kind of made a king in that region. And so he seemed to be a very pragmatic person. He knew how to support the right people, and so he became prominent. So while he was actually king himself, he made Herod governor of Galilee in 47 BC. And in 43 BC, he was assassinated. His cupbearer poisoned his cup at the instigation of one of his enemies, a bloke called Malchus. So in 43 BC, Antipas died. Some of the people who opposed him took the opportunity. There was a guy who, Antigonus, got the support of the Parthians, so these were kind of a warlike tribe. And the Parthians supported Antigonus and made him king in this region. So what happened was that Herod was actually the heir to the throne, and so he fled to Rome for help. And in 40 BC, the Roman Senate declared him to be king of the Jews. So he came back to Israel with the help of Roman troops, captured Jerusalem and defeated Antigonus, and then he effectively became the king in Judea. He was originally married to a woman called Doris, and when he became king of the Jews, he banished his wife, sent her away, and her son, Antipater, and he married Mariamne I. And she was a Jewish princess. She was descended from the Hasmoneans. And so this was seen as a good political fix to, he married one of the former dynasty, and it was an attempt to actually legitimise his position as king of the Jews. So he had some marital association with the Hasmoneans. As time went on, the Romans expanded his kingdom. So originally he was just had Galilee and Judea, and his kingdom was successively expanded over the years. And so you can actually see that red line, which actually shows the totality of Herod the Great's kingdom. Octavian Augustus confirmed him as king in 31 BC and kept on increasing his kingdom. And one thing about Herod the Great, that he was a great builder, and he's renowned for actually building the Second Temple. This is a summary of Herod's family. He had 8 wives and 14 children. And his wives were Doris, Mariamne I, Mariamne II, Malthus, Cleopatra, Pallas, Phaedra, and Elpis. And their children are shown underneath each of the mothers. So Antipater was the son of Doris, so he was the initial heir to the throne because he was the firstborn son. Mariamne I had Alexandros and Aristobulus, and Aristobulus was the father of Herodias, who was the woman who asked for John the Baptist's head, as well as a couple of others, Lampsio and Cyprus. Mariamne II was the father of Herod II, also known as sometimes as Herod Philip, and he was the first husband of Herodias. So he was the guy who Herod Antipas took as his, Herodias divorced him and married Antipas. And so that was the issue that John the Baptist had. Then Malthus was the mother of Antipas and Archelaus and Olympias. So Antipas and Archelaus are important figures. And Cleopatra was the mother of Herod and Philip the Tetrarch. So Philip was also mentioned in the New Testament. And then there's a couple of other people who don't make as much of an appearance. First of all, talk about Mariamne I. As I mentioned before, she was a Hasmonean princess. Herod married her and banished Doris when he came to power, and she was supposed to be extremely beautiful. And Herod was extremely, thought she was great, and he was also extremely possessive of her. Antony and Cleopatra had a son, and they wanted him to actually be the high priest. And so they kind of pressured Herod to make their son the high priest. And so not long after he became a high priest, he unfortunately died in a drowning accident. And Cleopatra got extremely suspicious, and so King Herod was ordered to appear before Mark Antony and Cleopatra in a trial to see if he was actually guilty of killing Cleopatra's son. But he was worried that he would die in the hands of Mark Antony. And what he did is he actually asked his brother Joseph, said, if I die, make sure you execute Mariamne. Because he didn't want anybody else to have her. That's a very loving thing to do, isn't it? Unfortunately, Mariamne found out, and she wasn't too pleased. And so she refused sexual relations with Herod. And Salome was Herod's sister, and she was a nasty piece of work, and she plotted against Mariamne. Mariamne was accused of infidelity. She was brought to trial, supposedly found guilty, and Herod had her executed. And having done that, he felt really bad about it and mourned for her for 4 months, but it was a bit late. So he had banished his first wife, he had killed his second. Each of those wives had sons, and they weren't singing Happy Mother's Day. So towards the end of Herod's life, these guys were involved in plots to kill and poison Herod. And they were found out and they were executed. Herod went and virtually executed all of the Hasmonean family because they were actually threats to his reign. So there are two sides of Herod the Great. He was called the Great, so there's a reason for it. And it wasn't because he's great at killing his family. It was because he was the greatest builder in the Jewish history. And also he managed to increase the wealth of the country, so he did very well economically and with the building program. But he's also been described as a madman who murdered his own family and many others. So these are some of his building projects. He constructed the Masada fortress between 37 and 31 BC. So that's shown on the top left there. And so it's a fortress on the top of Masada. And this was the place that was during the Jewish wars around about 72 AD, where the Romans laid siege on Masada, and I don't know, there's about 900 inside, weren't there? Or? Yeah, and eventually the Romans broke through, and when they got there, everybody had committed suicide. So it was a very famous siege. He also built Caesarea Maritima, which is on the coastline of Israel. Maritima because it was a port. And also the Temple Mount. He was responsible for building the temple. But he also had a dark side. This is a bust of Herod, and may have been something like what he looked like. So he had a cruel streak, especially as he got older. There was intrigue and deception within his own family, especially from his sister Salome. So some of his children plotted to poison him. He became mentally unstable towards the end of his life. He executed his wife Mariamne and most of her relatives. He killed Antipater, his firstborn, as well as Alexander and Aristobulus. So these were the key heirs to his throne. And as he got older, he got more paranoid. And the Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus made the comment, "It is better to be Herod's pig than his son," which is quite ironic because a pig was a banned animal in the Jewish faith. So the slaying of infants in Bethlehem was consistent with his character. So these are the New Testament references to Herod the Great. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." When Herod realised that he'd been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Originally Antipas, and Herod changed his will right towards the end of his life, and Antipas and Philip just claimed that Archelaus sucked up to Dad just before he died. Anyway, Herod's will was confirmed, and so the three sons took their position. So Herod Archelaus lived from 23 BC to 18 AD. He was a son of Herod and Malchus, and principal heir of Herod's will. The will, as I said before, was contested by Antipas and Philip, but Augustus Caesar ratified Herod's will and appointed him ethnarch of Judea, and he was there from 4 BC to 6 AD. So ethnarch means ruler of an ethnic group. He had a reputation for being cruel and immoral. He killed 3,000 men in putting down a rebellion. They did rebel, and he had to control it, and so he had to do something, but he killed 3,000 people, and he copped the flack for doing that. He also divorced his wife, Mariamne III, and married Glaphyra. And Glaphyra, I think, was a divorcee of one of his relatives, and it actually was a violation of the Jewish law. And so people disapproved of what he did as a violation of Jewish law. And he was very unpopular with the Jews. So in 6 BC, Augustus deposed him. He was exiled to Gaul, and some people think he suicided not long after that.
6 AD, you mean?
Sorry, 6, yeah, that should be AD, 6 AD, sorry. Thereafter, Augustus lost confidence in the Herodian family, so instead of giving it to another son of Herod, he actually installed Roman governors there in Judea. So Judea became a Roman province governed by governors until the time of Agrippa I. These are the New Testament. This is a New Testament reference to Archelaus. After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who were trying to take the child's life are dead." So he got up, took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. But when he had heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets: he would be called a Nazarene. So that kind of does tie in with history, because Archelaus had a bad reputation. He was somebody to be feared. So after Archelaus, Roman governors were installed to govern Judea. And so they controlled Judea, Samaria and Idumea. And there are two types. One's called a prefect, another's called a procurator. A prefect was a military man, and a procurator was a financial person. So a procurator was looked after paying the troops and all this sort of thing. And these are the lists of Roman governors up to just prior to the Jewish wars. So, and I've just put some, they're initially prefects from Coponius up to Marullus. Herod Agrippa I was a Herodian, and so he had a brief reign. And then they had Romans again, and they were then procurators who were in charge of Judea. And I've just got some notes against some of them. The only ones you hear about in the Bible are Pontius Pilate, Porcius Felix, and Festus. But some of the others also had an influence. Coponius was governor when there was a rebellion by Judas the Galilean. Valerius Gratus was in power for over 10 years, and he was responsible for changing the high priests all the time. You'll see that in the next slide. Then there's Pontius Pilate, who you'd know about, and he was deposed by a Roman who was higher up, called Lucius Vitellius. Let's see. Felix was the one that Paul was initially sent to, who was in charge when he was imprisoned at Caesarea. Porcius Festus was present at Paul's trial. And Lucilius Albinus is the person who deposed Ananus ben Ananus. So that's Ananus, the son of Ananus. We're going to talk about him later.
I'm often saying that Judea was actually under the governorship of Syria. So Syria, that's that guy.
That Lucius Vitellius probably was the guy in charge of Syria. Yeah. Yeah. And during this era, we also have a whole series of high priests. High priests were Sadducees. They were appointed and deposed by the Romans. And Ananus had enormous influence. So Ananus ben Seth is the Ananias that actually appears in the New Testament. So he was appointed by Quirinius, governor of Syria, and he was deposed by Gratus. All right, so that's the governor who was sacking and appointing lots of high priests. Ananus had 5 sons. So each time you see Ben Ananus, that's son of Ananus. All right, and so his 5 sons became high priests at various times. And and it goes right through to 63 AD, where the last one was Ananus ben Ananus. All right, so Ananus, son of Ananus. And he was the person who was actually responsible for the execution of James. And of course, along the way you have Joseph Caiaphas. He was actually the son-in-law of Ananus, and he was appointed by Gratus as well and deposed by Lucius Vitellius, who was a governor in Syria. And at the time there were various Roman emperors. So Augustus was emperor between 27 BC and 14 AD. And so he was the emperor at the time of the birth of Jesus. Tiberius was the emperor during Jesus' ministry. And you have Caligula and Claudius. Caligula is not mentioned in the New Testament, but Claudius is in Acts. And Nero. So these people actually interfaced with the Herodians quite a lot, because typically what happened was when a young member of the family was actually sent off to Rome to learn about the political system, and they kind of met and became friends with future emperors. So in getting friendly with future emperors, that actually helped them get appointments later on when that person actually became emperor. Anyway, back to the Herods. Philip the Tetrarch. He lived from 22 BC to 34 AD. He was the son of Herod and Cleopatra. Cleopatra was one of the wives of Herods, not the same as Mark Antony and Cleopatra. He was Tetrarch of Iturea and Trachonitis from 4 BC. So on that map you see a green area. That was Philip the Tetrarch's area. He was the husband of Salome. So this is a different Salome. This Salome was the daughter of Herodias. So she was the one who actually danced in front of Herod and asked for John the Baptist's head. And she was the wife of Philip the Tetrarch. Now he was actually a quiet and moderate man, and from all indications he was quite a good ruler. He rebuilt Caesarea Philippi, and he didn't have any son, he left no heirs, and he does not feature much in the New Testament. There is only just the one mention where Luke describes the beginning of Jesus' ministry. So in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, Herod Tetrarch of Galilee, his brother Philip Tetrarch of Iturea and Trachonitis, and Lysanias Tetrarch of Abilene. During the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, the son of Zechariah, in the wilderness. That's the end of Philip the Tetrarch in the New Testament. Next we come to Herod Antipas. He lived from 20 BC to 39 AD. He was the son of Herod and Malchus. He was appointed Tetrarch of Galilee and Perea. So Galilee is the area north of Jerusalem, so it's around Lake Galilee, and Idumea is the areas in purple are the areas that Herod Antipas had. So he constructed Tiberias in honour of Tiberius the emperor at the time. He married Phasaelis, daughter of King Aretas of Nabatea. So Nabateans were Arabs on the east side of the Jordan. He married Herodias, the wife of Herod II, a half-brother. So he married the wife of his half-brother. He arrested John the Baptist and executed him, and also interviewed Jesus during his trial. So that's the Herod. This is called Antipas. So these are the mentions of Antipas, and he's the one who features most in the New Testament. So in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, Herod Tetrarch of Galilee, his brother Philip Tetrarch of Iturea and Trachonitis, I've already read this, and Lysanias Tetrarch of Abilene, during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, the son of Zechariah, in the wilderness. He went out into all the country around the Jordan, preaching a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. So with all that historical information, you would think that would tie it down pretty tightly. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So when you actually analyse all the dates, 15th year of Tiberius, that seems pretty definitive, doesn't it? But there's a problem. In 11 AD, Tiberius became co-regent with Augustus. In the 14 AD, Augustus died. So when was the beginning of Tiberius's reign? Was it in 11 AD or 14 AD? Add 15. So that means that this event corresponds to either 26 or 29 AD. We're not sure which is which. All right. Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea. He is governor between 26 and 39. So we're still 26 or 39. 26 or 29. Yeah. Lysanias was tetrarch of Abilene between 14 and 29 AD. So we know it's somewhere between 26 and 29. High priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas was between 18 and 36. So that doesn't help us. So the net result is that John the Baptist commenced his ministry in either 26 or 29 AD. We've got no way of telling.
Doesn't the Gospel of John, or the Gospel of John, mention the temple had been built for a certain number of years when Jesus first appeared? He said, "I will destroy this body in 3 years," and they the retort from the Jews, "This temple has been built for so many years, and that is a pointer."
Right. What were the number of years?
46, I think. Yeah, 46, I think it was. Yeah.
46. All right.
They know when Herod started building the temple, so they can use that as a marker.
All right, because the date I had for his building project for Temple Mount was 20 BC when it commenced. But I think that's a pretty rubbery figure. So if you add, that's interesting. If you added 46 onto 20 BC, that would give you 26. There you are, we've solved the problem. We'll write a paper, you and I, Steve. Right. Okay. Then the next one is report we have is on the death of John the Baptist. So that's described both in Matthew 14 and also in Mark. So I won't read the one from Matthew, I'll read the one from Mark. All right. King Herod heard about this, for Jesus' name had become well known. Some were saying John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, and that is why miraculous powers are at work in him. Others said he is Elijah, and still others claimed he is a prophet, like one of the prophets of long ago. But when Herod heard this, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised from the dead. For Herod himself had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put in prison. He did this because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, whom he had married. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. So Herodias nursed a grudge against John and wanted to kill him, but she was not able to, because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him. Finally, the opportune time came. On his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for his high officials and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias, who was Salome, came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. The king said to the girl, ask me for anything you want and I'll give it to you. And he promised her with an oath, whatever you ask, I'll give you, up to half my kingdom. She went out and said to her mother, what shall I ask for? The head of John the Baptist, she answered. At once the girl hurried into the king with the request, I want you to give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a platter. The king was greatly distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he did not want to refuse her. So he immediately sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. The man went, beheaded John in the prison and brought back his head on a platter. He presented it to the girl, and she gave it to her mother. On hearing of this, John's disciples came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. Luke gives a very brief reference to John's imprisonment. He said, "And with many other words John exhorted the people and proclaimed the good news to them. But when John rebuked Herod the Tetrarch because of his marriage to Herodias, his brother's wife, and all the other evil things he had done, Herod added to them all. He locked John up in prison." One of the things that's interesting about this, in Mark, it mentions his brother's Philip's wife, because Herodias was actually married to Herod too. So this Philip is not Herod the Tetrarch. Okay? So there's kind of some disputes. They're saying, oh, Mark got it wrong. And Matthew copied him. And so some people have said that this Herod too was also known as Herod Philip, but people dispute that. And they think that Mark may have made a mistake. So, but when you come to Luke, he doesn't say Herod, it doesn't say Philip, he says his brother's wife. So some people suspect that Luke may be conscious of the problem with Mark's text, and so he made it more ambiguous. Then in Luke 9, "Now Herod the Tetrarch heard about all that was going on, and he was perplexed because some were saying that John had been raised from the dead, others that Elijah had appeared, and still others that one of the prophets of long ago had come back to life. But Herod said, 'I beheaded John. Who then is this that I hear such things about?' And he tried to see him." So you get the impression that Herod, Antipas, is a torn character. He's kind of inquisitive, but he's got a lot to lose. Also, how do we know all this stuff about Herod? Well, there are indications in the New Testament that the Christian community had inside knowledge about what was going in inside Herod's court. So from Luke 8, "After this Jesus travelled about from one town and village to another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, and also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out. Joanna, the wife of Chusa, the manager of Herod's household. Susanna, and many others. These women were helping to support them out of their own means." So perhaps Joanna had inside knowledge about Herod's court. And the next reference I owe to Jeff Russell, who mentioned this in his talk. In Acts 13, it says, "Now in the church at Antioch there were prophets and teachers, Barnabas, son of Simeon called Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul." In Luke 13, Herod threatens Jesus. So at that time, some Pharisees came to Jesus and said to him, "Leave this place and go somewhere else. Herod wants to kill you." He replied, "Go tell that fox. I'll keep on driving out demons and healing people today and tomorrow, and on the 3rd day I'll reach my goal. In any case, I must press on today and tomorrow and the next day, for surely no prophet can die outside Jerusalem." So we gather that Jesus didn't have a very high opinion of him. So during Herod's trial, Luke reports that Jesus appeared before Herod. So on hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. When he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, so he was Tetrarch of Galilee, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased, because for a long time he had been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about him, he had hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there, vehemently accusing him. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him. Dressing him in an elegant robe, they sent him back to Pilate. That day Herod and Pilate became friends. Before this they had been enemies. Acts 4 is the last mention of Herod Antipas. And this is when the church was threatened with persecution and they prayed for boldness. But I'll just read verse 27. So one of the things I said, indeed, Herod and Pontius Pilate met together with the Gentiles and the people of Israel in the city to conspire against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed. They did what your power and will had decided beforehand should happen. And so that's all we hear of Antipas. Antipas' demise came not long after this event. He was originally married to Phasaelus, and he got rid of her to marry Herodias. Phasaelus was the daughter of King Aretas, so Phasaelus returned to Dad. Dad was stinking mad. Aretas, there was also border disputes as well as this, but he was probably pretty mad at the way his daughter was treated. He declared war on Antipas. Antipas lost. So Agrippa I, his nephew, conspired against him. So Antipas was exiled by Caligula in 39 AD. And Herodias was his wife, kind of illegally. And Herodias was not compelled to go into exile with Antipas, but she chose to go. So she followed her husband into exile. And Antipas died soon afterwards, and that's a bust to him. Now we get on to Herod Agrippa I, who lived between 11 BC and 44 AD. So Herod the Great was the father of Aristobulus IV. He was Aristobulus IV was one of the sons that was killed by Herod just before his death. He was a husband of Berenice, who was a daughter of Salome. So it's very incestuous. Like Salome was Herod the Great's sister, and Berenice was daughter of Salome. So Aristobulus and Berenice were cousins, and yet they married. Okay, and Herod Agrippa I was the son of Aristobulus and Berenice, and so was Herodias, the wife of Antipas. So that means that Agrippa was brother-in-law to Antipas. Does that make sense? And he was also a half-nephew. So the family must have really loved each other, at least most of the time. All right. So he was Agrippa was a brother-in-law to a nephew to Antipas. After the death of his father, who was Aristobulus, he was sent to the court at Rome, which was a common pattern. He had Tiberius, the future emperor, liked him, and he was also educated with Caligula, who was a subsequent Roman emperor, and they became good friends. So Caligula made him king of Syria in 37 AD after Philip's death. So he inherited the area that was controlled by Philip the Tetrarch. He conspired against his Antipas, his uncle, and took over his territory, Galilee, after Antipas was exiled. So he was partly responsible for the demise of Antipas. And that's a bust of Herod Agrippa I. So he's quite a handsome fellow. So Emperor Caligula was assassinated in 41 AD, if you watch I, Claudius. And Agrippa supported Claudius in becoming emperor. So Claudius gave Agrippa control of Judea and Samaria as well. So his dominion became around about the same size as Herod the Great's original kingdom. And he was zealous for Judaism, supported the Jews. And he risked his life by preventing Caligula from desecrating the temple, and so he was actually liked by the Jews. However, he wasn't so good to the Christians. And this is the reference. It was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death by the sword. So that's James, the son of Zebedee. When he saw that this met with approval among the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the festival of unleavened bread. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. The night before Herod was to bring him to trial, so this Herod is Herod Agrippa I, okay, not Antipas. Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared, and the light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. "Get up, quick, get up," he said, and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. Acts 12 also reports Agrippa I's death. So it says here, then Herod went from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there. He had been quarrelling with the people of Tyre and Sidon. They now joined together and sought an audience with him. After securing the support of Blastus, a trusted personal servant of the king, they asked for peace because they depended on the king's country for their food supply. On the appointed day, Herod, wearing his royal robes, sat on his throne and delivered a public address to the people. They shouted, "This is the voice of a god, not of a man." Immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and died. All right. This, the death of Agrippa is also reported by Josephus, and this is a lot longer account, but it's very interesting, so I'll read the lot. It's 2 slides. But I might need a drink of water before I do. Now, when Agrippa had reigned 3 years over all Judea, he came to the city Caesarea, which is formerly called Strato's Tower, and there he exhibited spectacles in honour of Caesar, for whose well-being he'd been informed that a certain festival was being celebrated. At this festival, a great number were gathered together of the principal persons of dignity and of his province. On the 2nd day of the spectacles, he put on a garment made wholly of silver, of a truly wonderful texture, and came into the theatre early in the morning. There the silver of his garment, being illuminated by the fresh reflection of the sun's rays, shone out in a wonderful manner, and was so resplendent as to spread awe over those that looked intently upon him. Presently his flatterers cried out, one from one place and another from another, though not for his good, that he was a god, and they added, "Be thou merciful to us, for although we have hitherto reverenced thee only as a man, yet shall we henceforth own thee as superior to mortal nature." Upon this the king neither rebuked them nor rejected their impious flattery. But he shortly afterward looked up and saw an owl sitting on a certain rope over his head, and he immediately understood that this bird was the messenger of ill tidings, just as it had once been the messenger of good tidings to him, and fell into the deepest sorrow. A severe pain arose in his belly, striking with the most violent intensity. He therefore looked upon his friends and said, "I, whom you call a god, am commanded presently to depart this life, while Providence thus reproves the lying words you just now said to me. And I, who was by you called immortal, am immediately to be hurried away by death. But I am bound to accept what Providence allots, as it pleases God, for we have by no means lived ill, but in a splendid and happy manner." When he had said this, his pain became violent. Accordingly, he was carried into the palace, and the rumour went abroad everywhere that he would certainly die soon. The multitude sat in sackcloth, men, women, and children. After the law of their country, and besought God for the king's recovery. All places were also full of mourning and lamentation. Now the king rested in a high chamber, and he saw them below lying prostrate on the ground. He could not keep himself from weeping. And when he had been quite worn out by the pain in his belly for 5 days, he departed this life, being in the 54th year of his age, and in the 7th year of his reign. He ruled 4 years under Caius Caesar, that's Caligula. 3 of them were over Philip's tetrarchy only, and on the 4th that of Herod was added to it, and he reigned beside those 3 years under Claudius Caesar, during which time he had Judea added to his hands, as well as Samaria and Caesarea. Herod Agrippa II. He was a son of Herod Agrippa I, and there's a bust of him. He was a brother of Berenice, Mariamne and Drusilla. Drusilla was the wife of Felix, the governor. In 40 AD, he was given the Syrian kingdom. He looked after the temple and appointed high priests. And he was the one who actually deposed Ananus, son of Ananus. His kingdom was increased in 53 and 55 AD. And in 59 AD, Paul gives his defence before Agrippa and Berenice. So Paul gives his defence before Herod Agrippa II. Okay? Now, I realise the time, it's 8:05. We started a bit late. How are you going? So I can skip some slides and just jump to the end. But anyway, this is a passage from Acts 25 where Paul appears before Agrippa and Berenice. So I won't read the whole passage, but note down the bottom that in verse 22 it says, "Then Agrippa said to Festus." All right, so Festus was one of the Roman governors, and Paul appeared both before Agrippa and Festus. Anyway, they that heard his trial, and they were responsible for actually sending Paul off to Rome. I'll just read this section though. The next day Agrippa and Berenice came with great pomp and entered the audience room with high-ranking military officers and the prominent men of the city. At the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. Festus said, "King Agrippa and all who are present with us, you see this man. The whole Jewish community has petitioned me about him in Jerusalem and here in Caesarea, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. I found he had done nothing deserving death, but because he made his appeal to the emperor, I decided to send him to Rome. But I found nothing to write to his majesty about him. Therefore I brought him before all of you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that as a result of this investigation I may have something to write. For I think it is unreasonable to send a prisoner on to Rome without specifying the charges against him." So Paul gives his defence, and he makes this comment. So Paul motioned with his hand and began his defence. "King Agrippa, I consider myself fortunate to stand before you today as I make my defence against all the accusations of the Jews, and especially so because you are well acquainted with all the Jewish customs and controversies. Therefore I beg you to listen to me patiently." Paul gives his defence. Some of this is important. So verse 24. At this point, Festus interrupted Paul's defence. "You are out of your mind, Paul," he shouted. "Your great learning is driving you insane." He says, "I am not insane, most excellent Festus. What I am saying is true and reasonable. The king," this is Agrippa, "is familiar with these things, and I can speak freely to him. I am convinced none of this has escaped his notice, because it has not been done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you do." Then Agrippa said to Paul, "Do you think that in such short time you can persuade me to be a Christian?" And Paul replied, "Short time or long, I pray to God that not only you, but all who are listening to me today may become what I am, except for these chains." So Paul goes off to Rome. So Paul went to Rome. Festus dies. The next Roman governor hasn't come yet, so there's a gap. So that leaves the high priest in charge, Ananus, son of Ananus. And this is what Josephus describes the death of James, the brother of Jesus. So I'll take the liberty to read it. Ananus, who, as we have told you already, took the high priesthood, was a bold man in his temper and very insolent. He was also of the sect of the Sadducees, who are very rigid in judging offenders above all the rest of the Jews, as we have already observed. When therefore Ananus was of this disposition, he thought that he now had proper opportunity to exercise his authority. Festus was now dead, and Albinus, so that's the next governor, was but upon the road. So he assembled the Sanhedrin of judges and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose name was James, and some others, or some of his companions. And when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. But as for those who seemed the most equitable of the citizens, and such as were the most uneasy at the breach of the laws, they disliked what was done. And they also sent to the king Agrippa, desiring him to send to Ananus that he should act so no more. For what he had already done was not to be justified. Nay, some of them went also to meet Albinus, as he was upon his journey from Alexandria, and informed him that it was not lawful for Ananus to assemble a Sanhedrin without his consent. Whereupon Albinus complied with what they said and wrote in anger to Ananus, and threatened that he would bring him to punishment for what he had done. On which King Agrippa took the high priesthood from him when he had ruled but 3 months, and made Jesus the son of Damnius high priest. So you can see the interplay between the governors and the high priests.
Very important key there is that the reference to Jesus the Christ.
Yes.
Because there was another part in Josephus which other people say, oh, it must have been doctor, because
Yeah.
it almost claims Jesus was God. The fact there is this other reference to Jesus, as though Josephus is quite comfortable with mentioning this God
Yeah.
was the Christ. It's a duplicate reference that seems to give a lie to the doctrine of the other part.
Yes. Yes. So most scholars believe that this one's genuine, and because it's genuine, it also legitimises the other one as well.
It certainly gives that reference.
Yeah. So this is one of the most famous passages in Josephus, just this little reference to Jesus. The demise of Agrippa too. He was unpopular due to his capricious manner. The Jews expelled Agrippa and Berenice in 66 AD, just at the beginning of the Jewish wars. He went back to Rome, and he was the end of the Herodians. Berenice, his sister, went and lived in a town called Pompeii, which was a bad choice, and she perished when Mount Vesuvius erupted. So this is kind of a summary of the Herodians. Herod the Great, he rebuilt the temple. The Magi visited him. He slaughtered the boys in Bethlehem. Archelaus, he was a cruel ruler of Judea, and the reason why Joseph moved to Nazareth. Antipas, he was tetrarch of Galilee during Jesus' ministry. He beheaded John the Baptist. He was interested and concerned about Jesus' ministry, and Jesus appears before Herod during his trial. Herod Agrippa I, he was the king of Judea and Galilee. He killed James, the son of Zebedee. He arrested Peter. He died of wounds for allowing himself to be worshipped as God. Herod Agrippa II, he was king of Judea and Galilee. Paul gave his defence before Agrippa in 59 AD before being sent to Rome, and he was the last of the Herodians. Now, where do we get all this information? Well, of course, Google and Wikipedia. All right? Yes, but our primary source is Josephus, who lived between 37 and 100 AD. He fought against the Romans in the Jewish wars. There was a whole pile of soldiers who were caught in a cave, and they made a pact that they would all commit suicide. They drew straws, and the shortest straw got killed by the first one, and it just dominoed. And in the end, Josephus was left with one other guy, and they said, I'm not feeling so keen on this death business. and so they decided to surrender to the Romans. The Roman leader of the Roman army was a guy called Vespasian, and Josephus was smart enough to say that he had received a dream that Vespasian would become emperor. So Vespasian said, "Oh, that sounds good." And so he became friends of Vespasian. And he did. Yeah, he's right. So he wrote the Jewish Wars and also the Antiquities of the Jews. And that was, he did that in 93 AD. And so that's where we get so much of our information. So what do we learn from this? Well, we could get a couple of lessons. There's not what you know, but who you know. Or don't upset a woman, especially if her dad is a king. So that's the moral of the story. But more than that, we should actually appreciate the historical setting of the New Testament. So the New Testament is deeply embedded in the historical context. And Jesus was interacting with the politics of his day. So all the historical background makes sense. So it's not just a story, it's history. And also it was not done in a corner. A lot of these leaders were actually aware of what was going on. So the first century readers were familiar with the context when they actually read these New Testament letters. So don't just read the New Testament in a devotional manner and just with the attitude, what's in it for me? Because the New Testament writers are making claim about something that happened in history. So we don't have any busts of Jesus or Paul. We have busts of the Herods. We know what they looked like, but they're gone. But the influence of Jesus and Paul will go on forever. Thus endeth the lesson.